Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophet Samuel 2 chapter 7 in a clear and simple way, step by step. And let me tell you, this chapter contains one of the most absolute, profound reversals you will find anywhere in the biblical texts. It's a complete 180-degree shift from human ambition, what we think we want to build for God, to divine grace, which is what God actually wants to build for us. It is an incredibly powerful narrative, and we're going to take our time and break down exactly what happens, verse by verse, so you can really grasp the plain, simple meaning of the text. Let's dive right in.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're covering 5 key steps. First, we'll look at David's noble desire. Second, God's surprising counteroffer. Third, the eternal dynasty promised. Fourth, David's prayer of gratitude. And finally, we'll wrap up with some practical lessons and a quick chapter recap. We're going to methodically walk through all 29 verses of this chapter. And remember, we are strictly focusing on the simple, plain meaning of the text, the Peshat, to really uncover the who, the what, the where, and the why of this amazing story.
Section 1. David's noble desire. We're kicking things off with 2 Samuel verses 1 through 3.
So, to set the scene, the text tells us right in verse 1 that King David is finally settled into his palace. The Lord has given him rest from all his surrounding enemies. Just think about that for a second. After literally years of running for his life, hiding in caves, and fighting endless battles, David finally has a moment to just breathe. He has peace. But a major core tension is established immediately in verse 2. David looks around his magnificent, luxurious palace, which the text specifically points out is built of beautiful, expensive cedar wood, and he has this sudden realization. He looks out and he sees that the Ark of God, the absolute holiest object representing God's presence, is still being kept outside in a temporary, portable tent. Basically the exact same kind of tent they used while wandering in the desert. And you can feel it, right? David feels a deep sense of guilt. He's sitting in a grand cedar mansion while the Ark of God is roughing it. So he calls in the prophet Nathan, strongly implying that he wants to fix this. He wants to build a permanent, magnificent temple.
And honestly, what happens next brilliantly illustrates human nature, even among the greatest prophets. Look at verse 3. Nathan hears David's idea and immediately responds, "Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you." I mean, it makes total sense on paper, doesn't it? Nathan basically gives him a massive green light. He assumes, naturally, that building a magnificent house for God is a fantastic idea. Who could argue with that? But notice the crucial, kind of ironic detail here. Nathan completely agrees with David and gives him the go-ahead without actually pausing to consult God first. He just assumes God wants a cedar building.
That brings us perfectly to Section 2, God's surprising counteroffer. We'll be looking at verses 4 through 11. Literally, that very same night, before a single stone is cut, before any formal blueprints are drawn up, God steps in and completely interrupts this grand architectural plan. He speaks to Nathan and sends the prophet right back to David to reverse the advice he just gave. And God poses this incredibly profound question found in verse 5. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? Just take a moment to consider that. God is hitting the brakes hard. He is firmly saying that David is not the one to build this physical structure. It's a complete plot twist.
Now you might be wondering, why would God say no to a temple? Well, God explains exactly why, and we see this fascinating historical recap in verses 6 to 9. Let's walk through it. God reminds David that ever since he brought the Israelites up out of Egypt generations ago, he has never dwelt in a permanent house. For decades upon decades, he's been moving from place to place with a tent, the tabernacle, as his dwelling. God asks a rhetorical question here. Did I ever once say to any of the previous leaders or judges of Israel, "Hey, why haven't you built me a house of cedar?" The answer is no. God never asked for that. Then the focus shifts directly to David's personal history. God says to him, "I took you from the pasture and from following the flock." God reminds David that he is the one who reached down and elevated David from a humble, unknown shepherd boy to his present-day status as the ruler over all of Israel. God is saying, "I have been the active force here. I cut off your enemies. I made your name great." God doesn't need David to build him a house to secure God's legacy. God is the one securing David's legacy.
And that realization leads us right into Section 3, the eternal dynasty promised. We're diving into verses 12 through 17. Now pay close attention here because we're entering the absolute climax of the chapter. And there is a brilliant play on the Hebrew word for house, which is beit.
So as you'll see on the screen, there is a massive contrast between human ambition and divine promise. David's whole goal was to build a physical beit, a building made of stones and cedar wood to honor God's name. But God's counteroffer is absolutely astounding. God tells David, no, you won't build a house for me. Instead, I, God, am going to build a bait for you. But he doesn't mean a physical palace. He means an eternal dynasty, a royal household. God declares in verse 12 that when David's days are over and he rests with his ancestors, God will raise up David's own offspring, his seed, to succeed him, and God will establish that kingdom. God says that this future son will be the one to actually build the physical structure, the temple. But for David himself, God is establishing a royal family line that will endure forever. It's literally a gift beyond anything David could have ever imagined or built with his own two hands.
God elaborates on just how secure this new covenant is in verses 14 and 15, and he makes this incredibly powerful statement. God says, I will be his father, and he shall be my son, but my love will never be taken away from him as I took it away from Saul. Let's clarify what this actually means in plain terms. God is creating a totally unconditional bond with David's bloodline. He's being realistic. He explicitly acknowledges that future kings in David's line might mess up and do wrong. And if they do, God says they will be disciplined with the rod of men, meaning they'll face natural, earthly consequences and punishments from other nations or people. However, and this is the absolutely crucial point, the covenant itself is completely secure. His loving kindness will not depart from them. The kingship will never be entirely stripped away from David's lineage the way it was permanently taken away from King Saul. David's house, his kingdom, and his throne are established eternally before God.
Section 4. David's Prayer of Gratitude. Moving on to verses 18 through 29.
Honestly, how does a person even begin to respond to a promise of that magnitude? The prophet Nathan goes back and reports this entire sweeping revelation to the king. And David's reaction is just incredible. He doesn't throw a parade, he doesn't boast or start celebrating his own greatness. Instead, we get this deeply moving, quiet scene described in verse 18. King David goes in and literally sits down before the Lord. Think about that posture. Kings stand in pride. Kings sit on thrones above others. But David goes in and sits down in absolute awe and submission. His first words are, "Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far?" He recognizes his own utter smallness in the face of this massive eternal promise. He's completely astonished that God isn't just blessing his present life, which was already a lot, but that God has now spoken into the distant, far-off future of his family line.
We can really clearly break down the progression of David's prayer as we look at verses 22 through 24. It comes in three main parts. First, David acknowledges God's absolute greatness. He basically says, "How great you are, sovereign Lord. There is no one like you. There is no God but you." He roots everything in God's supremacy. Second, his prayer shifts away from his personal astonishment and moves toward exalting God's unique, historical relationship with the whole nation of Israel. He marvels at it. He asks, what other nation on earth did God go out to actively redeem from Egypt, freeing them just to be his own people? And third, he celebrates the fact that God has established Israel as his own people forever. You see, David realizes something profound here. This eternal promise to his royal house isn't just a personal favor. It's fundamentally about God securing, stabilizing, and blessing the entire nation of Israel as a whole.
So what is David's ultimate motivation in accepting this? We find the crucial point in the final verses of this chapter, particularly verses 25 and 26. David asks God, "Do as you promised, so that your name will be great forever." This is so important. David isn't asking God to fulfill this eternal dynasty promise just to inflate his own royal ego. He's not doing it so people will walk around praising the name of King David. No, he is asking for this dynasty to be firmly established, so that humanity will look at it, see the stability, see the grace, and eternally glorify God's name, declaring, "The Lord Almighty is God over Israel." In verses 27 through 29, David submits entirely to God's will. He says basically, "You revealed this to me, you promised it, your words are trustworthy, so please let it please you to bless the house of your servant." He asks for the blessing precisely and only because God is the one who initiated it and spoke it into existence.
All right, Section 5, Lessons and Chapter Recap. Let's look at some practical takeaways.
Now, while we are studying an ancient text about kings, prophets, and cedar palaces, the core human elements here remain incredibly relevant for our own self-improvement today. Step 1. We have to learn to accept gracefully when God, or just life in general, says no to our big plans. David had a beautiful, noble, well-intentioned ambition to build a grand temple, but God said no, and David had to learn to pivot instantly without an ounce of bitterness when his ambitions were redirected. That is a huge lesson. Step 2. Practice deep gratitude.
Just as David literally sat down in awe of his massive journey from a simple shepherd to a powerful king, we need to regularly pause, sit down, and be thankful for how far we've been brought in our own lives. And step 3, recognize that true blessings are very often long-term and eternal. In our lives, we often place all our value on immediate, physical achievements, like finally building that grand cedar building, whatever that is for you. But true legacy, much like the dynasty promised to David here, is built slowly over time, and it endures far, far beyond our immediate sight or our own lifetime. Let's do a quick, step-by-step recap of the narrative arc of chapter 7 to completely solidify your understanding of the text we just walked through. It all starts with King David finally resting in his brand new palace, feeling guilty and wanting to build a permanent cedar temple for the Ark of the Covenant. God, speaking through the prophet Nathan, firmly says no to that specific building plan, reminding David of how God has always been the one building David up. Instead of a physical building, God promises David something infinitely greater, an eternal royal dynasty, a bayit that will never be destroyed. And the chapter concludes beautifully with David responding not with disappointment over his rejected architectural plans, but with absolute profound humility, sitting in awe and offering a beautiful prayer of praise for God's supreme greatness.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, ask yourself this. When your own grandest, most noble plans are suddenly redirected or shut down, are you willing to just sit in awe, trust the pivot, and look for the much deeper, longer-lasting legacy that might be getting built for you? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.